On the Ukraine crisis, I'm joined by Anton Fedyashin. He's the executive director of the Initiative for Russian Culture at American University. Welcome back to the show. Let's start with these recent reports of Russian troops moving across the border. Do you think this situation will escalate even more? And what does this do to this supposed ceasefire that's been in place for months now that is pretty much been ignored?
Well, the first thing I think is to decouple the question of escalation from the movement of Russian troops. We've been hearing for months from the Ukrainian side about whole columns of tanks that they've destroyed that no one's seen. We've had Russian subs off the coast of Sweden that never materialized. Where here is that this may be the beginning of the escalation of the conflict from the side of Kiev, because for them to justify and restarting the war against the southeast, they need that Russian presence to be there. So far, the OSCE, which is the only international organization that's actually monitoring the border, has reported no sightings of any columns or Russian troops, and as a matter of fact, hasn't done that in months during this conflict.
So why do you think these accusations would be made, seeing as, you know, we've seen some recent elections, both in Kiev and the eastern region. We've also have seen a gas deal be struck in Brussels just a few days ago. Why now?
Well, because one of the most important issues that came up during the election, the Ukrainian election of October 26th, was the question of to be restarted or not. And instead of thinking about the results of that election in pro or anti-European terms, which is really a false set of reference points, what really happened during that election is that the majority of the people elected to the Ukrainian Rada are people who are willing to risk another military attempt at solving the crisis. And what's going on now is that Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, is being slowly forced to start making these decisions again, whereas it looked like he had stepped back and let peace have a chance.
So that being said, there are talks of more sanctions, the EU, US, Germany telling Russia that it could face more sanctions. Do you think pro-Russian separatists could be added to that sanction list? How would this be implemented?
Well, they can certainly be added, but since we all know, and the West has actually already admitted that sanctions have had absolutely no effect on Russian policy, it's even less likely that they will have any effect on the separatists or the federalists or however you want to call them, in the southeast of Ukraine. None of these guys have bank accounts in the West. None of them have any investments in the West. These are locals. However, if the sanctions begin to wreak even more havoc on the southeast, it will only push it towards Russia and away from Kiev. So this is an absolutely suicidal step.
It seems like things have been progressing, at least in a more positive direction. Do you think this conflict could expand beyond Luhansk and Donetsk? And what do you foresee happening? Because we've been talking for months, what's the tipping point? What's the tipping point? We thought it could be this or that. Where do you see it now?
Well, I think the main tipping point was back in April when the Kiev government decided, instead of negotiating with the southeast, to launch a war. And in the process, instead of marginalizing separatists and negotiating with federalists, it ended up radicalizing most people in the southeast and creating separatism, full-blown separatism, as a real political force. And now it's beginning to deal with those consequences. I think the biggest repercussion of whatever happens in the next couple of weeks will actually be for Kiev and for Poroshenko's government, because that government is not entirely in charge of its country or of all of the different military forces, including the private armies that are operating in the southeast. And I think the most important, the greatest danger here is that it will reverberate directly back to Kiev, and more instability, political instability, may actually take place in the capital.
All right. Anton Fedyashin, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.